I can't stand this job. The things that happen in this world are too cruel for me. And each time these incidents become more and more terrible.
It was a sunny day. Daddy Pig was looking after Peppa and George while they were playing in their favorite treehouse. Grandpa Pig had built this treehouse out of unused boards a long time ago, and it had been repaired many times. All would have gone well, but this time Daddy Pig wanted to get inside. So silly of him.
To come into our house, you must take off your shoes and say the secret words.
What secret words?
The secret words are Daddy's big tummy.
I think those are silly secret words.
It's the rules.
Daddy Pig frowned. Again, he was being called fat, even though he considered himself to be of a fit, athletic build. He was called fat too often. He was tired of enduring ridicule, especially from his family members. Ignoring Peppa, he reached inside. Daddy Pig could barely get in there and there wasn't much room. It was very cramped. He squashed his children in.
Daddy Pig, you can't come in here without permission, or else we...
This door was picked up by Grandpa Pig from the junkyard. To open this type of door, you had to twist the handle. Daddy Pig tried desperately to twist this handle with his feet, but because he was wearing shoes, his feet were slipping. He blocked the passage and could not turn around. They all realized they were stuck. They were very cramped, and soon it became stuffy. It was unbearable. They had to breathe deeply because of the lack of oxygen. It was also getting hot in the house because of the bright sun. They lay like that for about an hour. Now their legs were stiff, and they had a headache. Daddy Pig pleaded guilty, and he decided that he had to take action. George must climb over him to get to the door and turn the handle to open it. Despite his stiff arms and legs, George was able to climb on top of his father. But to let George get down, Daddy Pig moved forward a little, and then Daddy Pig moved too sharply, and George was impaled on a nail. Peppa cried, sitting in the puddle of her brother's blood. She had never been so scared. Urgent help was needed, so Daddy Pig tried to kick the door open with his feet. But the house collapsed with the door down. Now he couldn't get out the door. He found himself locked in and tried to turn the treehouse over again. But he couldn't do it. He was completely weakened.
Kids, you've been playing too long. I made chocolate cake for dinner.
It was a sunny day. Peppa and her family decided to go swimming in the pool, and George brought his... Maybe he should have called Miss Rabbit for help. She was the pool attendant, but he thought he could get the dinosaur himself. He had recently learned to swim. So naive. He swam down, feeling the water pressing harder and harder on his eardrums. The depth was deeper than he expected, but he kept going. After a while, he felt a burning sensation in his chest. He was running out of oxygen. His strength was diminishing and his eyes began to darken. He thought of swimming back, but the dinosaur was so close. A little more and the consequences would have been serious, but he was saved by his father. Daddy Pig was very unhappy with his son's behavior. If something falls to the bottom of the pool, you have to tell an adult. He used to be a great swimmer. Swimming to the bottom of the pool should be the easiest task for him. So he swam to get the dinosaur. Something's wrong. Daddy Pig didn't come up. He just lay at the bottom of the pool, floundering, panic-stricken with his arms and legs. George called for Mummy Pig. She wanted to call Miss Rabbit, but action was urgent. When she swam up to the body of Daddy Pig, she tried to lift him up, but it was as if his body was attached to the bottom. There was a water drain at the bottom of the pool that sucked up the water, filtering it. No matter how hard Mummy Pig tried, she couldn't move him. And Daddy Pig couldn't do anything about it. In his panic, he was only running out of oxygen faster. She had to call the pool attendant, but there was no one in the house. Miss Rabbit had worked her shift and flew to her next job. Maybe hiring her for half the jobs in this village was a bad idea. She started calling everyone she knew who could help. Luckily, Mr. Bull was nearby and was on his way to technically inspect the pool. He was able to de-energize the pump that was pumping the water. By this point, Daddy Pig had been in the water for about 12 minutes. He was only saved because he had done some professional swimming in the past, and the pool water was cold, which slowed down his metabolism. George was very scared. Now he is afraid of the water. He even refused to bathe in the bathtub. The storm lasted all night. Peppa and George were very scared. They could not sleep and were trembling in fear at the sound of the thunder. Usually thunderstorms are harmless and children shouldn't be afraid of them. But on this day, the consequences were worse than just a lack of sleep for the children. During breakfast, Grandpa Pig noticed that the children were in a bad mood. So he suggested that they have a good time by visiting the Monkey Trees Adventure Park. Peppa and George, in spite of their tiredness, cheered up because almost all their friends had visited this park, and now the day had come when they could visit it themselves. After a hearty breakfast, they all went to the park together. As soon as the children arrived, they ran out of the car and headed deep into the park without waiting for Grandpa Pig. After walking a little deeper into the woods, they met Miss Rabbit, who was working there. She began to give the children a briefing. Miss Rabbit assured Grandpa Pig that the children had been instructed and were ready to climb the tall tree. Grandpa Pig stayed at the bottom to take pictures. George asked Miss Rabbit to take them as high as possible. He was fascinated by heights and extreme sports. Peppa was uncomfortable. She was afraid to go to the high tree, but she wanted to be with her brother. Miss Rabbit called the children to follow her, and together they began to climb to the top of the tree. Finally, they reached the right height. However, as soon as Peppa looked around, she was immediately overcome with panic. She hadn't expected it to be this high up. She wanted to suggest George come back down, but the shock prevented her from saying anything. Besides, she knew George likes heights like this. While Peppa was in a daze, the caring Miss Rabbit had already buckled the safety belt around her waist, and with Peppa's acquiescence, pushed her forward. She began to pick up speed quickly, screaming with fear. At high speed, she caught on a protruding ledge in the rope. Peppa was terrified, hanging over a huge chasm, everything beneath her feet starting to go down. It seemed to her that she might fall any minute. At that moment, George was flying directly behind her. As he accelerated, he crashed into Peppa. Miss Rabbit had not followed the safety rules, launching George without waiting for Peppa to reach the end. The rope was damaged by lightning from yesterday's storm. They should have stood still and waited for rescuers, but Peppa was terrified and started swaying from side to side, which put stress on the rope. Grandpa Pig saw his granddaughter's skinned arm sticking out of a thorny bush. He quickly ran over to rescue Peppa. George was still conscious. He had managed to grab onto a tree branch in flight. All he could do was watch in horror as Grandpa Pig tried to save his sister. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that due to the devastating storm that night, almost all rescue squads were busy. The nearest ambulance was very far away, and the roads were washed out. George couldn't hold on forever. After a few minutes, his arms became stiff and his strength waned. Luckily, Grandpa Pig and Miss Rabbit had managed to put the boxes from the warehouse underneath, and George was only slightly bruised. After about an hour, an ambulance pulled up to the park, but Peppa's internal organs were damaged, and that hour of inactivity had serious consequences. Peppa was hospitalized with serious injuries. That day will be forever imprinted in George's memory. In vain, he asked to go on the highest ropeway. Daddy Pig remembered his childhood, how he used to love to go camping, make fires, and admire nature. He hadn't been outdoors for a long time and wanted to do it again. But what he didn't take into account was that he had changed since then, and that led to disastrous consequences. The mistakes started at the camping stage. He took food, water, and a tent, but the tent was too small. It was the same old tent he had slept in before. Additionally, Daddy Pig took along a raincoat that would protect them from the rain, and they went. When they arrived, they looked around. It was the nature he had missed. And as they started to settle in, they noticed that the tent was very small.
That's weird. I felt like it was much bigger.
You've grown since then, and your tummy has grown the most of all.
When it began to get dark, they built a fire. Finally, he could eat. He was tired from pitching the tent and gathering branches for the fire. His legs were sore from walking up and down the hills. All he wanted to do was just lie down and rest.
You're too big. You should have brought a bigger tent.
I like sleeping in the open air even more, though.
Daddy Pig lay down on the grass. He was uncomfortable. The small stones were digging into his back, and the ground was cold. However, there was a warm fire nearby and a beautiful night sky. It calmed and lulled him to sleep. But suddenly his stomach rumbled with hunger. He couldn't sleep hungry. He laid down his cloak and sat by the fire, trying to scrape the leftover food out of the cans. He used to have enough of this tin to fill himself up, but he hadn't taken into account that a lot of time had passed since then. He had taken too little food. It seemed like it couldn't get any worse. Now he's definitely not going to sleep here. The fire's out, and the rain will make him freeze. But there was still an option to wait in the car. He walked to the car as fast as he could to avoid getting wet and tried to open the door. He forgot his car keys in his raincoat. Because of the trees and the fact that the fire was out, he couldn't see where the tent was, but he remembered the approximate direction. But the slippery ground and his fatigue played their part. He went the wrong way and eventually realized he was lost. He tried to shout, but everyone was asleep and no one would have heard him over the noise of the rain. Camping was not successful. He just sat in the cold rain. He had already forgotten about hunger. Now, besides the fact that his legs were aching from the physical exertion, they were starting to aching from the cold. It scared him that no one would help him. He needed to take matters into his own hands. He saw a cave. It seemed dry inside. He could spend the night there, and by morning the rain would be over and he could find help. He tried to squeeze in with all his might, but his stomach clenched like in a vice. He tried to move back, but a cold stone pressed against his back. He kept trying to shift some way, but his stomach was too big. At the end, he realized that he couldn't get out, that he was stuck here and couldn't help himself. Fear and panic enveloped his body. And the next morning, his family found him, dead.